You're live.
We are Friday, April 10th, and we are here talking about the T-bill. And I think we're in the middle of markup. And are you Dave?
Yes.
Why don't you move first and then we'll move to Damien.
Okay, I'm ready if you are.
We need to name
Yeah.
who you're representing.
So yeah, for the record, David Roberts, I'm a managing consultant at EIC. We're a nonprofit based in Winooski, and I help coordinate the Drive Electric Vermont program. So I'm here to give you some information about the work we've been doing at Drive Electric Vermont over the past many years. And happy to take any questions you have related to EV, do my best to answer them. I have a presentation that I shared, it's up on the committee page. I'm going to try to kind of skip through some of the slides that are more background and try to, maybe linger on some of the slides that still are more relevant, but please stop me or, happy to take any questions as I go before I launch in. Anything I should know or overarching questions you all have been wondering about related to EVs?
I guess something that came up was that I'm sure what we're doing on EMBA.
I am aware, yes.
Okay, so there was an issue or a concern that it might deter folks from getting EVs.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because we have to pay for the infrastructure, but EVs right now are a pretty small percentage of the overall fleet, about 2% or so of the total vehicles registered in the state. But appreciate trying to get ahead of the curve in terms of getting something in place where EVs are contributing to infrastructure. So there has been some research. I haven't seen anything super recent, but several years ago around like the flat fees that most states have moved forward on, similar to Vermont, and that it does have a somewhat negative impact on EV perceptions and sales. But I don't know, exactly how that might manifest in terms of changes and adoption. There's so many different variables in play, so I think it's not ideal, but at some point it's going to have to be done. So.
And that's helpful. And then if you can talk about what's happening that encourages people, because my understanding is that we have a lot more used EVs, so the prices have come down. Obviously, gas prices going up sends people to EVs.
Yeah. So,
and the what I think is really important that we're not getting the word out, as far as I can tell, is that our network of charging is actually really good. It's a lot better than I thought it was. And in next year, we're going to have more than what the federal government recommends on our main roads. So if you can speak
so I
to
will
that,
definitely get into that.
would be great.
That would be okay. I'll go ahead and dive in then. So EIC, we're a nonprofit. We do operate the Efficiency Vermont Energy Efficiency Utility. Historically, Efficiency Vermont, which is funded on a ratepayer surcharge on electric bills, has not been able to do much in the realm of transportation electrification because even though EVs are more efficient, they're increasing electric use. So there has been a program that's allowed Efficiency Vermont pilot program that the legislature has passed twice now that has allowed Efficiency Vermont to do some work in the field. So we work closely, Drive Electric Vermont, Efficiency Vermont, both under the same roof, so we can coordinate and leverage the strengths of each other. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. Just going to dive into a little policy. Our work is Drive Electric Vermont, Efficiency Vermont programs, some of the market conditions, looking into some of the things you mentioned, Senator Harrison. Again, I'm just going to kind of quickly hit on some of these. The EVs do reduce emissions, even when you take into consideration the battery manufacturing and disposal, which does have a significant footprint, but overall, over the life of the vehicle, significant emission reductions. But EVs are still cars, and so, walking, bicycling, public transportation are still really critical to advancing our climate goals. EVs are called out in many ways in state energy and climate plans. So there's a number of areas that are called out here. Talked about fuel costs. So instant volatility in fossil fuels. We've seen gas prices, at least as of yesterday or the day before in Vermont, averaging around $4.13 a gallon, according to AAA. So that, is potentially kind of steers some people toward looking at alternatives, more efficient vehicles, EVs. If you're on an off-peak rate that a number of utilities offer, so Green Mountain Power, for example, their off-peak EV charging rate is equivalent about $1.30 a gallon of gasoline. So, really significant savings, about $5,400. If you've been owning an EV over the past 5 years with all those peaks in the gasoline prices, you'd be saving about $5,400 compared to sort of the average gasoline driver in the state. So
A year. 50.
that's over 5 years.
5 years.
It just depends how much you drive. The more you drive, the more you save.
Well, the average car in Vermont, so a little over 12,000 miles. The charge for vehicle miles traveled, the average would be about $154 a year. So compared to the price of gasoline, that's pretty minimal.
Mhm. Yep. So Drive Electric Vermont. So we've been doing this work in partnership with the state since 2012. So we have a number of different facets. We have quarterly stakeholder meetings where we try to get folks across state agencies, electric utilities, other organizations working on transportation efficiency, dealer association, others to get together, hear the latest updates on market conditions, charging, development, things of that sort. We've been doing consumer education and outreach, marketing campaigns, trying to get the word out. We've supported incentive programs. Currently, the state and federal programs are no more, but there are still electric utility incentive programs. So we have resources to help consumers figure out what's available to them on our Drive Electric website, driveelectricvp.com. We're doing business and municipal fleet support activities and supporting the state and others on building out more charging.
Can I
Yeah.
ask that the 5,400 that you give, and I look at your Vermont monthly fuel cost comparison, the back up to that page, some of the background material in there, because I don't see the 5,400 number in here.
Right.
And as we talk about all of this, what I take out of that chart is that the price of gasoline is probably the biggest determinant of whether someone might be interested in moving to an electric vehicle.
I think it is a determinant. I think it needs to stay high for a long period of time to really shift consumer behavior. I mean, that's what we've seen, at least in the past. There are other factors. Some people really appreciate the technology and performance of EVs because they drive really well. Some people are just looking for, there's a lot of personal sort of emotion in vehicle purchasing for consumers, not as much on the business side. Businesses tend to be more, oriented toward cost of ownership issues, but on the consumer side, we'd all be driving small, very economical vehicles, if not for a lot of the other decisions that people make around why they're purchasing the vehicle they are. So fuel costs, definitely a big one, but a lot of other things in play.
I'm not saying there aren't multiple, but fuel costs are probably on the list of many, probably right at the top.
Sure. I mean, certainly presently, you know, with the state and federal incentives not being available and so costs, you know, if somebody is worried about costs, the savings on fuel are significant right now.
You know, as I'm looking at the state and federal incentives, help to grow it, the price of fuel, in comparison to $154 charge or $14 per 1,000 miles traveled to stabilize the road system. I think we all know that if we hit a pothole in the wrong way, it's probably not good for any car, electric or otherwise. It just helps us make a comparison. So if some of the background material that helped produce this chart, if you could send that to us, it would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about some of the different, so carrots, the incentives, fuel costs, things like that. We've got some of the sticks that the state has employed related to vehicle fuel economy and emission regulations. And then what we like to call sort of megaphones, is sort of third leg of the stool of getting the word out on EVs, is more sort of consumer awareness on education. So it's a lot of the work that we've been focused on at Drive Electric Vermont, sort of crossing out some of the things that are no longer here in terms of state and federal programs. The emission regulations, the Governor Scott paused the enforcement of those last year, and the authority for California and the states that sign on to the California program was rescinded by Congress. It's currently being challenged in court, so there's some uncertainty how that's all going to work out. But at least for now, the prospects aren't great that those clean car regulations are going to be back, at least in the way that they were enforced as of 2 years ago, let's say. So there's a lot of shifts that have happened in the sort of policy environment for supporting EVs, but there are still things happening on a more local level. I mentioned utility incentive programs. The state's still investing in charging infrastructure. Those federal funds were sort of restarted, fortunately. So there are still things happening, but it's definitely a changing environment that we're looking at. Gonna just briefly skip through some of this, a little more background on our Drive Electric Vermont work, the importance that people need to be familiar with EVs before they consider purchasing one. And so just going for a ride can really support somebody who maybe wasn't considering one previously, might give them a second thought about, oh yeah, you know, it might actually work for me, especially if you're in a 2-car household, things like that. We've got our website is really our most public facing resource. So we've tracked the traffic on that. You can see, you know, back to 2012, we started small and things have sort of had some ups and downs depending on incentives, availability, fuel costs, things of these sorts. The real big ramp up that you see sort of at the end of 2021, that was part of a large marketing campaign that Efficiency Vermont funded. And there's been that campaign spending varied over time. So that's some of the dips. And certainly last year, we're seeing some dips. I think most people who are maybe in the market for an EV were aware that the federal tax credits were ending last September, pulled forward a purchase if they could. So we sort of always expected things would be fairly slow the last quarter last year and the first quarter of this year. And starting to see indications that things are perking back up, especially with fuel costs increasing. So we have a resource here, the incentive finder, where people can filter, you know, you're looking for an all-electric vehicle, who's your utility? Are you looking for charging maybe in your home or business? So lots of great resources for anybody who's thinking about an EV. And some resources related for EV owners as well. So we do offer technical assistance. We're fielding inquiries from consumers and businesses, working closely with the state. We've supported VTrans and the NEVI planning work that they're doing, supported ACCD and some of their charging activities as well.
So thank you. So do you know how many or what proportion of EV owners or drivers have charging at their home?
It's the majority. We don't have absolute statistics, but it's certainly the majority. Some of them may be getting by with the level 1 charging, just plugging into a standard home
Right.
outlet. That can work if you're driving less than 40 miles a day, especially if you have a plug-in hybrid. Level 1 charging can work fine for a lot of folks. Level 2, the 240 volt, like an
Right.
electric closed driver, is definitely preferred. And a lot of the utilities have incentives to provide the charging equipment, but also make sure that people are charging during off-peak times. So
Right, and that's what Green Mountain Power does, but they know how many there are.
they know how many
So-
chargers they have. They don't necessarily know how many EV drivers they have in their territory, though, because not everybody has their charging equipment.
Okay,
Yeah.
but can we get those numbers? Does somebody have those numbers?
I emailed when we were going to talk about it on the bill. They did, I think it was, I want to say 1,500 home chargers that they have for some customers buying about their own, for others.
Right.
If-
But they make it easy. I mean, it's free.
Yeah, it's free.
If you,
And then you
Put it
can
in,
participate in their program.
yeah,
I want to say it was 1,500. I'll find it right now.
okay, great.
It's free for all electric vehicle, plug-in hybrids. They don't provide it for free.
Well, I did get it for free,
5,000,
5,000.
700 level 2 chargers installed and enrolled in their EV rate program.
Okay.
Yeah, Green Mountain Power is free.
Yeah,
For-
well, they had. I received it free but free also means that you're in their service. And it was a hybrid and it was at a part of a cycle where they weren't providing as many as they thought they were going to, so they made the rules a little looser. Oh, so. You lucked out, yes.
Yeah, so some of the work that we're doing, just some feedback on it. I want to call your attention to this group, Neighborhood Connections, who's doing community transportation work in Londonderry. They've got 2 EVs in their fleet now, and the prior slide had a photo where they set up a charger at their sort of headquarters. And they're projecting they're going to save $24,000 this year, just the fuel and maintenance savings on with using those EVs. So really significant, really enjoy doing that work to help some of these entities save money.
And aren't those vans?
They have a Honda
Oh,
Prologue,
just-
and some of the agencies are using vans.
Okay.
But this is a smaller service.
That's a great organization.
So we did make a funding request to House Transportation and in general. So we received $325,000 to support this work in the last fiscal year. We know things are very tight, and we appreciate that is probably more of an ask than we're going to see. The House bill has passed out of the House, had I think 193,800. So we appreciate, that support if it moves forward, and hope to continue doing this work over the next year or longer. We currently have enough money from the funding that we have in the bank, so to speak. We think to keep going until about September of this year.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry for being late, Dave. But I think I may have seen some information about Drive Electric in the past, so hopefully I didn't miss any big changes. So I'm very supportive of us fully funding the 325 amount, and I'm wondering, and I know you were saying there's kind of an uptick recently with gas prices and EV driver adoption, but I would say that it seems like Drive Electric is the place where people get information, get up to speed on what the incentives are, and it's a really critical part of that decision-making point. So I'm concerned that you've seen the underfunding in the budget, because I do think that will have an impact on people gaining access to EV driving. And I'm wondering what would you have to stop doing if you didn't get the full funding or close to the full funding? Like, what would we be losing? It feels like quite a bit.
So I think the first things that we would have to tack back on is some of the more kind of one-on-one assistance. So like that technical assistance to businesses and communities, because that is pretty time consuming. I mean, the website, I think we would prioritize continuing to keep that available and as up to date as we can, just knowing that it's a very efficient way to get a lot of information out to folks. So it's the more
Yeah,
kind of one-on-one types of assistance activities. There may be some detailed analysis, like ACCD asked us to dig into the charging data for work that, charging that the state has supported in the past. So pretty time-consuming analysis. Things like that would probably be the first to drop, I would think.
well, thank you. And I hope that we
So,
fully invite for you.
the 325 is the full year funding.
Yes, it might even take us a little more than a year. It kind of depends on the requests that we get coming in. So in the past, I think
You, and you have funding for the first quarter of the year,
yes. Mhm.
and the House put 183 in.
Is it?
I don't know what the
It's
exact.
190.
It's like
190.
170.
And I-
Oh, what?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So Efficiency Vermont, I mentioned a little bit, they've been doing some work under what we call the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act, or EMA, which has been focused around working with the dealer community and a broad consumer awareness campaign. That work was extended in 2023 for 3 years. So that authorization is sunsetting at the end of this year. So Efficiency Vermont is planning to end these programs at the end of this calendar year. So the dealer program has supported 58 dealers with selling EVs. So dealers can get support for installing charging, service equipment, things of that sort.
Okay.
So I will say, this is the only program I see actually being able to make MLUP happen. Like, we talk a lot about the mileage-based user fee specifically for battery electric vehicles. And so far, this is the only program I know that is actually working directly with dealers to give them information about EVs. So it seems like a really bad time for this thing to go away, when we could be facilitating all sorts of conversations with frequent EV selling dealerships about the changes when they sell a vehicle to connect that person's proper registration and odometer reading. Like, I don't think this is a good idea to end at this point, since it's like all of that work that could have been used to support MBUG long term won't be there. So is EMA the problem, or why is it because we have to extend EMA for another year? What's going on with that?
So, there's ongoing conversations between Efficiency Vermont and the regulators at the PUC and the Public Service Department, and, concerns about electrification. So using Efficiency Vermont ratepayer dollars.
Fuel versus, yeah, okay.
So I think Efficiency Vermont is, feels like they've done some good work here, but it wasn't a priority for them to renew the EMA program. And it's not every dealer that's participating.
Right.
So I think, obviously Vermont DMV works closely with dealers, and they would certainly be involved. And, it's possible, still figuring out how the sunset process might work with this program. There may be elements of it that we can bring into our Drive Electric Vermont work, keep it going, because we were working with dealers before the EMA program started. So at this point, it's not an organizational priority to extend it. I know Burlington Electric Department has some interest in extending some of the work they're doing. So there may be some nuance here that I'm missing, but that's
Okay. Well, it's a bummer to see the connection go, and I hope that the agency uses those connections to support an MBUG program in 18 months.
Yeah, so a little more background on some of the work that's been done through the Efficiency Vermont program. There have been some dealer training for sales staff. Dealers do get a lot of training, sales staff through the manufacturer that they're working as a new car dealer, but some EV specific things that we've offered through this program. And the consumer awareness campaign. So this is, a lot of online ads. Or at one point there was a TV ad run, which ended a couple of years ago, but a lot of just sort of broad consumer marketing activity around normalizing EVs, getting people more familiar with them. And you can see, really significant increase in traffic to the Drive Electric website as of late. some of that work is continued. So I guess I should pause there for any, I have now just a couple slides related to ongoing market conditions and some of the charging infrastructure things that.
Was that the good use of the prompt there that you showed of the lighting? At your large dog?
Oh, no, that's funny.
It's pretty cavernous.
I've never heard it called
Yeah.
You've never heard the prompt?
I've never heard the front.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's what they call them. You have a prompt.
I don't,
You don't?
Not yet.
Well, some of the smaller ones don't.
but I'll get a Rivian one day.
They probably have.
Yeah, so, in industry, there have been some significant changes, as I mentioned, and automakers are responding to market conditions and capping back some of their EV investments. So we've definitely seen EV models discontinued, some of the announced production facilities shifting to gas cars, things of that sort. But globally, the trend is still clearly toward electrification. Europe, China, other countries are still moving ahead. It very, very, very quickly advancing. A lot of that has to do with the decrease in battery prices. So over time, battery prices have dropped precipitously, fortunately. And this is sort of a lot of the idea behind incentives is to find that market, get to the economies of scale, and get to the point where hopefully EVs are at parity with gasoline vehicles. And there are some cases now, especially if you look over the life of the vehicle, the total cost of ownership, where EVs do cost less even without some of those incentives that have been available. But there's still some work to be done on that front. A lot of the sort of current pricing and deals are related to automaker programs. So some automakers have been more competitive or seeking that market more aggressively. So Hyundai, for example, has dropped the price of the Ioniq 5, one of their popular all electrics, by $7,000 in this model year. So base MSRP at $35,000. Starting to see other price drops, and on the flip side, we're seeing Ford is announced they're discontinuing the F-150 Lightning and their E-Transit van. So it's sort of some good and some bad, but overall, I shared in my testimony materials a copy of our latest Drive Electric Vermont fact sheet, and the backside of that is a table about 60 models that are still currently available for sale new in the state, and many more available in the used market now. So this is a lot of EVs were leased over the past several years. There was one of the facets of the federal tax credit is not every EV would qualify for a tax credit on a purchase, but they could qualify on a lease because of the way the law was written. And so tons of EVs on lease that are on lease will be coming off lease over the next 2 years. And so there's been a number of media reports on this subject, and starting to see this. We've been seeing a steady increase in used EVs over time, and this is where things really get much more affordable. And we're expecting to continue seeing that. It's a little bit tricky because as EVs come off lease in Vermont, they don't necessarily stay in Vermont. So they get typically returned to a dealership. The dealer has the option to basically buy it out, or well, first of all, the consumer can buy out the lease if they want. But in some cases, it's just not the buyout price is not reflective of current market conditions. So a lot of people just choose not to exercise that option. The dealer then gets an option, and if the dealer doesn't want it, it goes to a regional auction. So, which is outside of Vermont, typically. There's not really.
I equate the price of an electric vehicle because they're generally more expensive than combustion engines for vehicles. How would I measure the price above? I'm with the new truck that Jeff Bezos is coming up. It's late. That's supposed to be in a price low 20s to mid 20s. I think that will do more than almost anything to pick up sales. So how can I is there any good measurement between what's out there that would make the vehicles more affordable to the general public than they have been?
Well, certainly the growing availability. Just new cars in general are so the cost of a new car, like the average cost of a new car, electric or gas, is like
expensive.
$50,000 these days, roughly. So you know, a lot of people are looking at used vehicles and used EVs. You know, if you're willing to settle for something that's a little bit older technology, a little higher miles, and the batteries are holding up quite well. So that was a concern several years ago, is how are these batteries going to hold up in used EVs? And at least so far, they're holding up quite well. So you can expect about 2% less range annually on an EV battery, give or take. So after 10 years, you might have 80% of the original range, but for most people, that's still plenty, certainly for daily travel. So, you know, it just depends on the EV, but you can get a used Chevy Bolt for 12,000, something like that in that range, depending, you know, a little bit older one with some higher miles. So it's just like any other car at this point. You know, you get into the used, you have a big depreciation hit as soon as you drive a new car off the lot. And
But there are no figures out there about on the new car range. You know, I can pick out one, and if I was trying to make a comparison about different stuff across the board.
you can, I mean, like, so for example, Chevy has an Equinox EV and they have an Equinox gas vehicle. And so,
Did you have those comparisons, or you just showed each one the price and the operating, like a very similar car like that?
yeah, I don't have that here, but I'm happy to share some information.
That would be
Follow
great
up.
if you had anything you had for comparison.
Sure, yep. This is what we've seen adoption look like as of the end of, you know, including the last quarter of last year. So just sort of calling out. I saw like a big ramp, and then when the state incentive programs ended, definitely saw a decline in sales after that. So it's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's kind of what you wanted, in the sense of it does appear there's strong indications that those incentive programs were really supporting the market. So that money was being spent in a productive way. And then with the end of the federal tax credits, you know, things have continued to go down, and they're at pretty, you know, levels going back to say 2023 at this point. And we do anticipate over the next 6 months that things will pick back up, and certainly if fuel prices stay high, that would be very interesting to see what that means for the overall market. And so you mentioned charging infrastructure earlier, and that Vermont does have a quite robust network. And we do have, if you look nationally, we have more charging ports per capita than any other state. That's something we've been proud to say for a number of years now. There are still some areas of the state that, you know, could use some additional charging infrastructure. Northeast Kingdom in particular. There's been the state has funded a fast charger in the Island Pond area, but trying to find a suitable site location has been really challenging. So I know they're continuing to work on that. Hopefully something will move forward this year. So in addition to the locations, it's also nice to see that the number of charging ports per location is also going up. So you have more redundancy if there's a maintenance issue, or now it's not uncommon that, especially in some of the more popular spots, that you might have congestion for charging. So you have to wait, or, you know, try to hit it at a time when it's not so busy. So I think those are, you know, continuing to improve the reliability, and just availability is still important, but we do have a really robust network. And that's, you know, some states, I think we're well ahead of where New Hampshire is. New Hampshire doesn't look too bad on this map, but that's mostly because those are Tesla fast chargers, most of those larger circles. So they are starting to make some progress on some of their state and federally funded programs, but Vermont has been well ahead of them in terms of implementing those.
And I think we really need to let people know about that, because that's really important, and I didn't know. And there are more coming on, and by the end of 27, if everything goes as planned, we'll have even more. But Tesla is allowing some of their units to be.
Yeah, they're
used
newer,
by others.
they're sort of first generation, what they call superchargers. They're fast chargers, don't have the right compatibility to allow other vehicles to use them, but the second generation and later do allow non-Tesla vehicles to charge. So that means, you know, most of the Tesla locations in Vermont do allow non-Tesla vehicles to charge, and all the automakers are moving to the Tesla plug. It's called the NACS. And
Right.
basically, automakers have adapters now, so even if you don't have a car with a Tesla plug, you can still use their fast charging.
Right, but my understanding was that in some situations you have to have a Tesla account.
Yes,
So
yes.
that prohibits no matter what kind of plug you have. So,
Right.
so do we have on our map, on one of our maps, does it show which Tesla sites take non-Teslas?
Yes, so the map that we share on the Drive Electric from our website now is embedded from PlugShare.
Uh-huh.
PlugShare has a smartphone app and a website you can go to, and you can filter to show that you can filter out the Tesla only locations.
Yeah, like this, it's not that map, it's this map.
Right, but what I would like, for example, in my town, there's a huge Tesla charging, but I only see Teslas there. So hopefully they'll be one of the ones that change, but that's up to,
Tesla.
right. I mean, there's a negotiation between Tesla and the federal government, I believe, that has been going on for years to get them to share their chargers.
Update the chargers.
Yeah, but it's a choice because because Tesla, their users expect a certain quality, like they don't want to have to wait. Their system is really good. You can plan ahead, you can tell them that you're coming, get in a queue. And they don't want to change that. And the federal government had a process like 3 years ago to have a monetary incentive to get Tesla to
Yeah, they worked out
with
a program
other-
where Tesla would be eligible for NEVI funds.
yeah, yes.
And so that requires Tesla to allow sort of some more flexibility on the payment options. But it doesn't necessarily mean they need to go back and retrofit existing.
Oh, no, I understand, but we have the ability, non-Tesla people have the ability to get the
Yeah, but they're,
connections.
like I have one for my electric car, I can charge at a Tesla facility, but not all the facilities have been updated to allow non-Teslas to charge.
Right,
So it's,
right,
so I pull up some of them and if it's not updated, I can't charge.
right, but I think that's a choice of Tesla, whether or not to
If they spend.
update
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant investment. It's not just software, it's hardware for them. So they need to go out and,
Yes,
make some investments there. So, yeah, we're talking about sort of how you pay at charging. So
Right.
there's a lot of consumer frustration
Yes.
around this issue. How many, I have 10 plus apps on my phone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For all the different charging networks. And, right now we tell people if you're going on a road trip, ideally you're planning out your stops and just sign up for those networks in advance. So you're not pulling up somewhere and trying to figure out how to sign up and all of that.
With no Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Phone support usually aren't smiling people, at least.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, hello?
they don't answer.
Yeah, so this is improving. I think where things seem to really be heading is the contactless credit card. We're
Yes.
seeing more and more consumers getting these tap to pay credit cards, and it's much easier. I think the charging equipment manufacturers have a much easier time integrating that technology as opposed to the chip and swipe credit card readers, which the state has required for state funded fast chargers to date. Because not everybody has a contactless credit card currently, but I think at some point, because of the additional security and maintenance issues with the
So-
credit card readers.
Are all charging stations that chip and swipe is there?
No,
Is that what you're,
I'm saying for state funded locations,
State funded.
fast charging locations.
and do you know how many are and aren't?
Not off the top of my head, but I would say, if you're looking at locations, it's probably around 20% might have chip and swipe readers.
Okay.
So we're working on, obviously, the T-bill, and then I also have some language that two sections of we've allowed to be in the bill, and then the third section was a study, all around EVSE. But one of the confusing parts for me is I thought we did require that you had to have credit card access, public or private. So is that just like a matter of enforcement and like it's just not a thing, or why is it still, do we need to bolster the law to actually get folks to have those things? Like what's going on there?
I don't, and I'm not an expert, may need to phone a friend or what have you, but on this particular element, but my understanding is that it was only required for the state funded
Uh-huh.
locations. So,
So maybe we do need to actually put something.
So the. And. Or, I can't.
Go ahead.
Um,
Give your name.
For the record, David Leonard, Office of Legislative Counsel. The state law does say public chargers shall accept multiple forms of payment. It does not specify what multiple points means. And there is not necessarily an enforcement mechanism on that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how well known that is, or two, whether multiple forms would mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and it could mean contactless payment and you're compliant. Or it could mean, accepting multiple apps if you partnered with someone else.
So shipping swipe, which is, with the card we hold, you said 20%?
that, don't hold me to that, please, but that is my rough
How would
estimate.
people pay?
You have your phone, or you have you see the little card, the little orange card in the corner, they'll mail you one, and then it's like you tap it like you would.
And then, if you're a Tesla owner, you have plug and charge.
Yeah, you have
to plug it
charge,
in
I
and
guess.
connect
But
it.
I have that on my phone. You don't have to use that phone. Or
Yeah, some vehicles are moving, but that doesn't work at every fast.
No, only certain.
Yeah, but some of them are, you have to use their app and you have to have an account. And when
Yeah,
you're trying to get an account, there's nobody
Yeah,
there,
I'm just-
or they break.
Yeah.
But I just want to ask, if we do have that requirement, is that something that ag could check for when they do their measures thing? Inspection? I mean, it seems relevant.
Yeah, I would love if they could do that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's, happy to talk more about any of this stuff, but just to kind of wrap up my presentation at least, we're seeing market adjustments. Always knew the day would come when those incentives ended. It came sooner, at least on the federal side, than I think anyone thought, at least in the industry. But, we'll see what happens with fuel prices, manufacturer pricing and production, all these different factors will influence when we get back to higher sales levels. The used EV supply increasing is a big part of that, bringing more affordable options. And, definitely more work to improve the public charging. We didn't talk much about multi-unit residential charging, but that is a key issue for EV owners. I think being able to charge where you live is the lowest cost, most convenient way to do it. And if you're in a condo or apartment, you may have more challenges. It may be a lot more expensive to get charging installed. So the state has had some funding programs to support that, which have been really helpful. Hopefully those can continue in some manner. And we're continuing to do our work as Thrive Electric Vermont, and hopeful to have some additional funding to keep going after September.
If they want, go ahead.
Well, I would just say I'm really appreciative that you took time today. So thank you for coming in. I always appreciate kind of your thoughts as we think about what will affect EV drivers. And we've had a lot of conversation about MBUF, the mileage-based user fee, and how it's starting not as a voluntary program, but starting as mandatory. I don't think we're having you back in again before we vote on the bill. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to any reflections about mileage-based user fee or other parts of the bill, H944, that we're going to be voting on.
Yeah, so, we are state funded, so I'm here to, provide information, but not be an advocate. So, I think, as I said a little bit earlier, and maybe before you were able to join, it's at some point EVs, hopefully we start to see more EVs on the road, and at some point, it's going to be necessary that they contribute in the same way that gasoline cars do. And so when that point is reached, there's a lot of trade-offs. You may see some folks who are disappointed in current EV owners as well as prospective shoppers as additional fees come into play. But you know, I leave that to you and others to, you know, figure out the best time to do that. It's tricky to know, you know, exactly what a certain fee might mean in terms of decrease EV interest or sales. So I don't, you know, I mentioned there have been some studies on some of the earlier flat fees that did show, you know, some decreased interest in EVs as a result of those, but the ones that I'm aware of at least are, you know, several years old now. And so I think it's hard to tease out exactly what it might mean for adoption and the ownership experience. But, you know, at some point, hopefully we'll figure out a path forward that works for everybody.
Well, you know, so some of your issue in the upkeep of roads is not your fault exactly. But, you know, internally within budgets, you're plugged in, all the plugins, the money that comes in from that is the sales tax. And none of that sales tax goes towards the upkeep of the infrastructure for highways. So if, you know, we haven't been totally thoughtful about the way that we pull all this together.
Yeah, so certainly you all are have real challenges, and I appreciate that. You know, but you know, certainly, I think UVM has been in to provide some information about the research they did for VTrans and the impact of not adjusting for inflation being, you know, really a big impact on what the transportation funds can do. So
Thank you.
thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So you also had a handout that showed all the EVs for sale, right?
Yes, the fact sheet, the back side of that fact sheet does have the list. It doesn't have every EV because it doesn't fit on a page anymore.
Yeah.
But it's
You didn't know which ones. How did you choose which ones to put on?
there's some editorial judgment. You know, the more popular ones.
I noticed the Lucid Air was not.
Oh,
Well, I put in the Gravity.
I saw that.
They're both
That's
they're both pretty esoteric. You know, you don't see there's not many in Vermont, but they do have incredible range.
I always had it once. I was at a charging station.
yeah, like this,
Yeah.
I have the whole chart. Yeah, this is so great. I used to bring this with me to stuff because to your point, Senator Westman, people go, well, how much is it? You know, that's really
Yeah.
the question. And so they've got all the base rates of each of the vehicles that are most common and what the incentives are. Yeah, and it seemed like the conversation that I was having with people was not ICE vehicle versus EV vehicle. It was used vehicle or new vehicle.
Mhm.
And also people want Subarus, right? And Subaru was kind of late to the party.
Yeah,
But
but
it looks like
They're late to the
they,
party, yeah.
but
I
they're
will-
coming,
I
they
will-
are at the
I
party.
will say
Yeah.
the idea that this summer there'll be a small pickup from Slate,
Oh, yeah,
which is
Slate.
the Jeff Bezos thing. And they're talking about base prices in the low to mid 20s.
Wow.
I think that will change the world.
I hope so.
I think at this point we're, and thank you very much for being here. We have, next, I think Christina, are you there?
Miss Jensen, if you're there. Oh,
I'm here. I couldn't find the buttons. Sorry about that.
And I think you've seen the draft of what we're talking about.
I have. And are you, okay, I see people coming and going, but we're all set?
Yep, we're all set and we're looking, we need to identify yourself and then talk to us about what we are contemplating putting in our transportation.
Perfect. Well, I'm Chris Jensen, as you know. I am an attorney. I practice in Burlington with Primer. And my practice focuses on representation of common interest community associations. I also work with property managers and unit owners. So this is really the focus of my practice. I'm sorry?
Perfect.
I'm here though also because I am the chair of the Legislative Action Committee for Community Associations Institute, which is a national organization that works with associations, owners, and property managers. So I will try to not take up too much of your time today. I think generally the bill is, it strikes a good balance. We have a huge variety of common interest communities in Vermont. They run the gamut from $1 million communities with $1 million units to starter condos. So because of that, we have a comprehensive statute which really tries to retain the flexibility for these associations to govern themselves, because they're governed by unit owners, volunteer boards. So we try to retain that flexibility so that they can govern the communities as appropriate under their particular circumstances, but at the same time have some standards. And so one issue which has been challenging for the past several years has been adapting to improvements in technology, heat pumps, EVSEs, all sorts of things like that. And those really were not contemplated by the drafters of our statute. So I'm pretty happy to see H944. There are a few changes that I would suggest. And these are to address really concerns that apply to CICs differently than potentially other owners like landlords. So the first I would ask is that you consider, and I've floated this language to Legislative Council just to give them a bit of a heads up, but to clarify that the permissible use.
Chris, let me ask, you sent the language to Damien?
Yeah, to Damien and Cameron.
Okay.
Yep, just because they have enough to do without trying to take notes on everything. So first comment, I would ask that you consider making section 3125 clarify that the permissible use of EVSEs in residential common interest communities is non-commercial. So my reading of the bill is that it really contemplates EVSEs for personal use. So that could be done by modifying section 3125B1 to provide that the EVSEs installed under this section are for the use of the owner and the occupants of the owner's unit. Second suggestion is that so this is about to get a little bit lawyerly, and I apologize for that in advance. One issue that we run into with the Common Interest Ownership Act is that reallocations of common elements, so that's the common land of the community, that land is owned either by the association or by all of the unit owners together. So reallocating that property for the exclusive use of one unit owner requires amendment of the declaration.
Could you just repeat what you said? It was really hard to hear what you said.
Oh, I apologize. So one issue that we run into with common interest communities is that the common land, that can be parking lots, that can be yards, sidewalks, that land is owned by all of the unit owners together, or it's owned by the association. But in either case, reallocating it for the exclusive use of one unit, and that could be anything from assigning a parking space to allowing a unit owner to construct something on the common elements that's only for their use. So in the EVSE case, allowing a unit owner to install an EVSE or EVSE on in a yard or in a common parking area would potentially reallocate common elements to that particular unit. That would require a vote of all of the owners, an amendment of the declaration. And I think that's one thing you're trying to avoid here. So my suggested way to address that is to provide in the statute that installation of EVSE shall not be deemed a division or reallocation of common elements and shall not alter the allocated interests of any owner. So the allocated interests are the interests of each owner in the common elements, and changing those allocations requires a unanimous vote of the owners. And as you can imagine how challenging that is to get. And I should pause and ask if you guys have any questions.
We have one question.
Just one question
Sure.
on your last suggestion. This is Wendy Harrison. We can't see you, by the way. I don't know if you know that.
I don't know why. That's
But-
odd. I'm sorry.
So your last suggestion, would that mean that the owner who pays for the installation of the charger would not be the exclusive user of the charger?
No, the person would be the exclusive user, but that use would not be deemed to change the common element allocations.
Okay, so the underlying language or authorities would be the same, but the person could say or have control over who uses the charger.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. But control over the charger, I think that's a good segue to back up a little bit into my first comment. I don't think that you intend to allow unit owners to have commercial use of their EVSE. So a unit owner could not, for example, advertise on the internet that you can come and charge your car at my unit.
Right.
So occupants, sure, guests, fine, but not commercial use. So jumping to my third comment, another issue that has arisen with a couple of my Vermont communities is that there are older buildings and we might be able to, the existing infrastructure would support one, maybe two EVSE installations, but it's not going to support it for the whole community. So you could address that by providing that if the board reasonably determines that the cumulative use of electricity in the community attributable to the installation and use of EVSE requires additional infrastructure improvements to provide a sufficient supply, the association can assess the cost of those improvements to the EVSE users. And the reason that's necessary is because only if the declaration provides that expenses incurred for the benefit of fewer than all unit owners can be assessed to those owners. Only if the declaration provides that can the association assess owners differentially based on things like EVSE use. Does that make sense? I should just pause after each of my comments, and I only have a couple more, so don't worry.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we thought we addressed that by just saying that the condo owner, for lack of a better term, it would be paying all the installation costs, but you just want to make sure that the installation costs extend to any upgrades to the transformer or from utility.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Can I just a follow-up? So say there's 4 chargers, number 5 comes in, everybody has to get upgraded. Would this allow 1 through 4 to be charged? To have to pay their share?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay,
yes. And I think that's a fair way to approach that.
yeah, it seems that way to me.
Yep. So then, fourth comment, successor responsibility is obviously an issue. And you have approached that here by providing that the EVSE owner is required to disclose the existence of the installation and the responsibility for it. My concern with that is that it doesn't protect the association in the event that the successor owner doesn't fulfill their obligations. So I would propose strengthening that by providing instead that rather than disclosure, the statute should require removal and restoration, removal of the EVSE and restoration of the common elements, unless the successor agrees in writing to undertake the responsibilities under this section. We have, especially with condos where there are a lot of first-time homeowners, people don't necessarily understand their obligations under the governing documents. And that can really put associations and owners in a position where they're undertaking obligations that they didn't know anything about, even though they should have. That's a whole different question. But by providing that the seller actually obtain the buyer's written undertaking to, the obligations of the EVSE, that would prevent that from happening and make sure that owners understand what they're getting into. And if the successor doesn't want the EVSE charger, then the seller can remove it. So the fifth item that I have is with respect to 3125C, which is a list of permissible regulations that can be imposed. I would just suggest adding a C5, which a catch-all, to say that the list of reasonable restrictions is not exclusive. That would allow associations who have particular circumstances to tailor the restrictions, the regulations to their particular needs, and just avoid any argument that these are the only restrictions that can be imposed.
My only concern with that is, I guess, what's another reasonable restriction?
Well, that's going to be dependent on the specific community where the installation is made.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you have an example, or like, do we get into an issue? If somebody wanted to prohibit them, they could use that as a way to put in another restriction that restricts it. In fact,
Yep, I certainly understand that concern. But I do think that the requirement that the association act reasonably, is already in place in multiple places. So it's not the concerns that I usually see from my association clients are with respect to whether they're even legally authorized to allow these installations. That's been the primary concern. People want these.
But we do say that it has to be, any regulation can't have the result of not allowing it, right?
Right, so the language already says that any regulation that effectively prohibits or unreasonably restricts would be void and unenforceable. So this would be consistent with that by saying other reasonable restrictions. So by including the reasonable restrictions, and then it also says that further up, it also says this subsection shall not apply to provisions that impose reasonable restrictions on EVSE. So basically the prohibition on language that would prohibit or unreasonably restrict doesn't apply to reasonable restrictions on that. So this is kind of consistent with the framework throughout.
I think my computer's frozen. I don't understand what's happened.
You can still hear you.
Can you still hear us, Chris?
I can hear you now. I'm not sure what's going on with my computer. Oh, Zoom is not responding. Okay.
We're here, we hear you. We're just trying to figure
Okay.
out, is it on your end or on our end?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Maybe
We can hear you.
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I think that, trying to recall exactly where we were.
We heard from our Ledge Council that there's other wording in there that would prevent an unreasonable new restriction that would have the result of prohibiting an installation of EVSE. So I think we're fine.
Great. That certainly is how I read this section. So that completes my list of suggestions. Again, I think it's a good bill and I appreciate the hard work on it. It certainly is going to be welcome for my clients. I don't know if you have any other questions for me.
I just have one question. I don't know if you only represent the associations, if you ever represent owners in associations against the associations, or even if you haven't, have you ran into these disagreements with the EVSEs and the participants or the owners and members of the association feeling like that the association was unfairly limiting their access to EVSEs?
I do represent individual owners. I do primarily represent associations, but I also work with a lot of property managers. So I hear about disputes that arise and concerns that owners have. The concerns that owners have expressed to me or that have been expressed through property managers are things like whether the infrastructure of the community is sufficient to support EVSE chargers if more than 1 or 2 units want to install them. The other issue that primarily comes up is the question of the association's authority to allow installations in the common elements. And this statute is narrowly tailored, which I appreciate, to address that issue. It allows installations in the common elements, but is primarily geared toward installations in parts of the common elements that are already dedicated to the use of an owner. Other issues that arise are with respect to insurance risk to the association from these installations, and electricity use, because one challenge with this is going to be that not all associations have individual billing for electricity in the common areas. So it may be challenging as a practical matter to figure out how to assess the cost of the EVSE and their use. And owners who don't use EVSEs are certainly going to be concerned about paying for them.
So, Chris, besides yourself, and we're trying to draft this narrowly, who else should we hear from?
I think it would be helpful to hear from property managers, and I've reached out to a couple that I've done a lot of work with. I don't know if they were just not available today, or if I can't imagine that they're not happy to speak with you. But property managers would be helpful to hear from. They're the people who probably are most familiar with owner concerns and the challenges that arise from trying to get these things installed.
It would be helpful if you had specific people and their contacts if you could get to those to us today.
Yep. Yep, I can try to do that. I need to obviously, you know, run it by them first and then pass it on. But I'm happy to do that.
I, well, I'm not sure what the last few words you said were, but
Oh, good.
Well, sorry about that.
no, that's perfectly fine. The technology is great when it works great and sometimes not so good when it doesn't.
A little frustrating.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so, other than to thank you guys for the hard work on this.
And if we have further questions, we'll be back in touch.
That would be great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
And I think there'll be some drafting for you.
Yeah, I have the changes that she proposed. I think Cameron and I can dig into that and get that language in if the committee wants it in. Yep, I'm seeing that's not great. I'll get that into the bill with the modifications.
Yep.
Great.
We do have Patrick here. I think at this point, we're going to take 10 minutes, and if you could be